Okay, welcome everybody. We have two speakers tonight, but before we get to the speeches, I want to welcome you to my adopted city. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in New York, and then my wife turned to me after 25 of our 41 years together and said, you know, I'd like to bring up our kids in a civil city, in a place that is progressive and open and interesting. And she pointed to the map. She had never been to Seattle, and thus we ended up in Seattle. So we are thrilled to be in our adopted city. As folks know, this is one of the 10 largest cities in America. It's the northernmost city in America, northernmost large city in America, but this is winter here, so it doesn't snow here. It rains, and then it snows in the mountains. So if you're a skier like I am, this is heaven. This is a great place to live because it's ringed by mountains and ocean. 50% of the city is the Puget Sound and Lake Washington, and it is the home to 17 Fortune 500 companies. It's an economy that is thriving and a population that's still growing. The main city's about 750,000, but the greater Seattle area is about 8 million people. So we're thrilled to have you here. This is pretty typical. This Pacific weather is typical of the winter, and we appreciate you braving the East Coast. Many of you are from the East Coast and being here. But we're here to celebrate in part the two recipients of the Bobby Jones, Chiara and Siringo Mailia Foundation Award. But before we start, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the people that make this happen. Most importantly are the professional staff of the Chiara and Siringo Mailia Foundation, the Bobby Jones Foundation, led by none other than Dorothy Poppy, right over here. And I call them her two children. She has three children, but her biological child, where is her biological child? Mary. Oh, there she is, Mary over there, and Caitlin Esposito back there does the research. And then all the folks, the people, this is a 501c3 organization. And I think it's essential that we talk about the mission, because the mission is what drives the people in this room. The mission of this organization is very unique. It's one of a kind. Not just because it gets, when you look at the charity index for all of us that give money to the Chiara and Siringo Mailia Foundation, the Bobby Jones, it gets 100%, because all the money goes into research, advocacy and education, or clinical care, okay? So this organization exists to help patients. It started by patients, okay? And it's already given away $6 million to forward the goal, the mission of curing Chiara and Siringo Mailia. And it's been an enormous, all my patients get the Chiara and Siringo Mailia Foundation booklet because they want to get good information. They want to get scientifically based information, not just Dr. Google. And they get it through the Chiara and Siringo Mailia Foundation, Bobby Jones. And thank you for the Board of Trustees in this room. Can you all stand up? You are the directors and motivators and movers. Come on, stand up. Lori Watson, Lori, come on, stand up. Ty back there. And where's the, right, and the president didn't stand, they're right in front of us, okay? You're very modest, okay? So without further ado, thank you for coming to the city. I hope you have a great time. It's surrounded by 3 national parks, and there are 485 parks in this city alone. So there's a lot of fun things to do. It's a very disruptional city, great jazz, the birthplace of grunge, as well as one of the birthplaces of West Coast jazz. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce, and tomorrow we're gonna brag more about our winners of the 2024 award, Excellence in Medicine, John D. Heiss, the surgical director of the surgical branch, neurological surgery branch at NIH, and I'm going to talk more about him tomorrow. And Jorg Keltkamp from Hanover, Germany, who is one of the premier scientists in the world in the pathophysiology of syringomyelia. So, John, just because your CV is on top, we're going to start with you first, and then Jorg, you get a chance to rest before you speak. So without further ado, John, can you come up and tell us what you know?
Thank you, Rich. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the great honor of allowing me to speak to you today about new concepts in primary spinal syringomyelia. I'm a senior clinician. Rich wrote me one of the letters supporting me for that position, so Rich is quite a person in many ways, as you know. So I'm going to start with sort of some basic slides, but I don't want to insult anybody. But just to know what the impact of syringomyelia is, it affects about 1 out of 10,000 people. And most of the syringomyelia is caused by Chiari malformation and problems at the base of the skull. But about 12%, as you can see there, is caused by spinal arachnoiditis. And that is a condition of scarring around the spinal cord. And as you can see there on the cyst in the spinal cord, that causes the spinal cord to malfunction, and that causes things like pain and sensory loss and paralysis and spasticity. And those obviously affect the patients and their families. So primary spinal syringomyelia, like other types of syringomyelia, result from a bottleneck or an obstruction of the flow of spinal fluid. And it's thought that that bottleneck somehow leads to too much fluid being left in the spinal cord. Either too much fluid comes in from the outside, or too much fluid that's made in the spinal cord can't get out. But anyways, it results in too much fluid in the spinal cord, which coalesces into a syrinx. As you can see over there on your right, the cyst in the spinal cord, which develops over a long period of time, that eats away at the center of the spinal cord, resulting in loss of very vital nerves for sensation and movement, and people pay the price for that by losing muscle strength and abilities. But the type of syringomyelia that I'm going to talk about is a type related to scarring around the spinal cord. And what happens there is somebody has bleeding from trauma, or they have an infection, and that causes what's called adhesive scarring. So whenever you have inflammation, you have cells, and the cells recruit other cells. It's like a party. And they make this scar tissue, and it's like arachnoid. You see the spider. And it causes the layers of the meninges, the dura, or the arachnoid and the pia, to bind together like they were held together by adhesive tape. And that leads to closing of the spinal fluid pathway, which causes syringomyelia. It also impairs the spinal cord blood flow, and it tethers the spinal cord to the dura. And the reason that that's bad is because when you move, your spinal cord moves a little bit. And if it's held down every time you move, it tugs on the spinal cord, which leads to malfunction and injury to the spinal cord. So today we're going to talk about extensive and limited or short arachnoiditis and primary spinal syringomyelia. And the other thing is that, as you can see on your right there, the arachnoiditis can be focal posterior, where it's very accessible through laminectomy, or it can be all the way around the spinal cord, which is a much more difficult problem. So here's a case where this person came and they were going to have a shunt, and they just said, well, hey, can you look at my scans and tell me if I'm doing the right thing? And what we did is we saw that there was a cyst at the very bottom of the MRI scan, and you can see in the, I don't have a point. Oh, here's my pointer. But down here, this is a normal spinal cord here. Oh, I guess that's not shown. And but at the bottom here, you can see there's fluid in the spinal cord, and it's caused by the cyst down here. And that cyst is this. And so if you remove the cyst, then the syrinx goes away, and you have much better fluid flow. And so this is the kind of condition that we can treat quite effectively if it's limited. We did a clinical study with 36 patients, though, and we looked back and we said, well, who are the people who do well, doing well meaning they stayed the same or they got better, and who did worse? And worse means they continued to progress, have worse problems. And the people who did better are the people whose syrinxes became smaller after treatment, whereas the people who did poorly were the people whose syrinxes didn't change after treatment. And the people who got better were the people with limited disease, like I showed you on the scan. People who did worse were the people with extensive disease. So one conclusion would be, let's just treat the people who do well, and just say, hey, the people who do poorly, there's really nothing to do for them. But our approach, or our thinking was, well, maybe we can help out the people who didn't do well. Maybe we could come up with a different approach. And this is just another example. The harder we worked, the more laminectomy levels we did, because some people had very extensive scar. The people with the longest decompressions, they had the least reduction in syrinx size, whereas the people with small laminectomies and focal disease, their syrinxes became smaller and the patients did well clinically. So again, it's like, what can we do for the people who have extensive scarring? And this is just another example of another group, and they found the same thing. Focal patients do much better than extensive arachnoiditis patients, and people with, if you treat the underlying problem, which is the scarring, those people do better than if you just poked a hole in the syrinx and decompress the syrinx that way. All right, I didn't invent the endoscope, I'm just using it, and other people have used endoscopes, but it's a process. And people have used the endoscope, but they seem like they use it and then they stop using it. And the question is, well, why do they stop using it? But I think the technology is improving. This flexible neuroendoscope is 3.3 millimeters in diameter and has a working channel of 1.1 millimeters where you could put that really small forceps through, and that forceps opens to 5 millimeters. So And really the back dimension of the spinal cord is about 10 millimeters, 8 to 10 millimeters. So you can really decompress using that tool. And I just want to show you an example. Like, there's some people, even those ladies, you know, you consider a healthy 84-year-old, she's 84, and she said 2 previous surgeries that she had recurrence after that, and she said, well, she's having more trouble walking and decreased sensation. And so we thought, well, we can't do the same thing that she had previously, and we can't do laminectomies over the whole spine because she's 84 years old. We didn't want to kill her, and as I told you, it doesn't work anyway. So we thought, well, why don't we just do open surgery, the laminectomy, for the most intense scarring, which is here. This area. And then we'll use the scope here. Here. Oh, okay, thanks. Okay.
Top that one.
That one, okay. All right. So this is the view for laminectomy. This is the kind of scarring you see with arachnoiditis. Here's the spinal cord down here. We have a band left here, and then there's some scarring of this arachnoid. So you can see how thick the arachnoid is. This is the dura. So, okay, so I'm going to show a movie here that just, okay, it's going already. So this is the view you get with the endoscope. And these are we're going down, we're trying to create a passage for the spinal fluid to pass through. Okay. See, we're going through here. These are vessels on the surface of the spinal cord. This is the dura. This is the arachnoid. And remember, I told you that the spider, it's like a spider's web you're going through. So this is like putting the scope through here is like an icebreaker going through like Lake Superior. It's just breaking things up here and trying to expand the space. And what we're trying to do is create a fluid pathway to prevent that mechanism of syringomyelia formation and reverse it. So here's a spinal cord down here, here's some nerve roots over here. We're trying to open up this space. And all this is underneath the lamina. We didn't have to open that up, but we're getting, here's the opening there. So we need to work further on that to open it up. So these are some of the techniques. We can use the forceps to break things up. We can do the opening just using the scope as I showed there. If the scope shows us where an adhesion is, we can sometimes put something sharp down there and cut it. Sometimes we put a catheter into an adhesion that the scope won't go through, but we can push a catheter through that. And sometimes if there's a catheter already in position, we can work around that. And we've used all those techniques. And it's hard to ferret out what improvement was caused by the laminectomy versus the endoscope. But we certainly didn't hurt anybody by using the endoscope. And some patients improved with that. And this was a tough group of patients in general that we worked on. So I think that we've taken the field a little bit further. Other pioneers have started things, but I think this can be developed further. But the metrics for taking this field further would be, we have to do it safely. In other words, the endoscope has to fit in this space, and it's 3.3 millimeters. We can't put it in a space that's like 1 millimeter. We could put it in this space, but not in that space. We're going to get better with experience, and we should be better with using the endoscopic forceps, and you could put a laser fiber through the scope working channel as well. And eventually, if these scopes can be made smaller without reducing the size of the working channel, potentially we could introduce the endoscope percutaneously. And then these people coming in, they wouldn't have to have open surgery. You could just put a needle in the back and put the endoscope through that and cut adhesions that way. So you might not correct the problem completely the first time, but you might, through several treatments, you might correct the problem. All right, so that being said, the current treatment of primary spinal syringomyelia remains microsurgical opening through a laminectomy. But we hope that development of this neuroendoscopic treatment could improve the treatment, especially the patients that don't do well with extensive laminectomies. And I think we've achieved some milestones through research and clinical practice, and we know that obstructions cause syringomyelia, and if we relieve the obstructions, the syringomyelia resolves, but that's easier said than done, and we really have to accomplish that goal in the patients with extensive arachnoiditis. I think if we can get further reduction in the endoscope's diameter, but preserve its ability to cut the adhesions, I think that will provide a lot of benefit. And we have to gain interest of the endoscope manufacturers to create some endoscopes that can do that. I think presently the endoscope's a little larger than I would like it to be. So as Rich said, Bobby Jones Foundation has raised a lot of money and has supported research, education, awareness, and advocacy. And I'm greatly honored by being one of the recipients of an award from the Bobby Jones CSF organization. And I thank everyone for showing up and listening to my talk. Thank you very much. I didn't ask if anybody had any questions.
Oh.
Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Is there a diagnostic imaging modality that show tethering might be so you don't look at the scope? Or is it
Well,
just a scope and then search and destroy?
If you have highly T2 weighted MR images, you can see the bands, and Miles could tell you more about that. You know, it's called Fiesta. It depends on the manufacturer what it's called, but it's the same technique that you use to see nerve roots, and like for the 7th and 8th nerves, you apply that to the spine and you can see bands. Yeah. Yes, Fraser. Yeah.
So if you had a 4-level system of arachnoid cysts,
Yeah.
really compressing the spinal fluid, in that scenario, what's the likelihood after an intradural resection of the cysts of developing a lot more scarring and recurrence of the same?
Well, I don't think if you have a cyst, I think you can resect it and you can do a 4-level laminectomy. I think that's different from arachnoiditis. But I must say that when we've resected cysts and thought that we had the whole cyst removed and we looked up and down with the endoscope, I have a couple patients where we hit an obstruction and we perforated with catheters. So it's just like MRI, intraoperative MRI is a quality control measure. The scope, it can be a quality control measure to make sure you've accomplished your goals. Yeah.
A shout out to the person who asked that question. For those of us who don't know, Fraser Henderson and Becky Henderson have been really some of the energy that has permitted this gala for 14 years, and Fraser's head of the executive committee. So thank you, Fraser and Becky. It's amazing. Just a shout out.